Welcome to the Veteran Ventures podcast, where we have one goal: to help transitioning service members find the next mission that is right for them. We dive into the stories of highly successful veterans making waves in their civilian pursuits so that we can highlight their lessons learned and expose everyone to the array of amazing options that are out there after leaving the military. We really have just one ask: send this to a buddy who's currently transitioning or thinking about transitioning out of the military. Oh, and if you like the show, we'd appreciate a rating and review. Well, how often is it you zooming around on the golf carts in the background?
Unfortunately, not as often. We did have a membership at that golf course and we loved it. We loved the amenities. We loved everything there, but it was like it was too much money for how little we used it. We were going like twice a month and it was like, okay, I did the math, the very easy math, just dividing the cost by 2 and realizing that every time I went, it was costing me way too much money that I could use somewhere else. So when we first got on island, we were using it like 2 or 3 times a week and it made sense. But then when I transferred to Fort Shafter, which is about a 45-minute drive, then that's when I stopped using it. And then we had a third kid and it was like, we never golf. We try to, we love golfing. We love doing that stuff, but then, it just doesn't make sense.
Didn't Courtney grow up golfing? She's a pretty solid golfer.
Not like sports team wise. She was never on a golf team, but she did golf growing up and she enjoys it. I mean, her short game's way better than mine. She can do a flop shot way better than I can. So
I would consider all of my shots flop shots, but not in a good way.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the fun with it. We do have fun, but it's obviously with everything we have going on, right? It's like, what do you prioritize? And golfing just isn't high enough on the priority list to get out there and do it.
This is my last golf story before we move on. But I used to, I had a baseball background, so I would slice everything horribly. And so I got to the point where I was golfing enough to where I knew how to aim. I'm a righty hitter. So I would aim far enough left that the slice would end up center. And so I would just play with what I had rather than maybe the more simple solution or long-term solution of just fixing my dang swing. Right. I would just aim 45 degrees left and end up somewhere near the fairway sometimes.
Right. Yep. No, and I mean, I think that's everybody's problem. Slicing, I think, is the most common issue off the tee. I'm the same way, but I'm a lefty, so I'd be aiming the other way.
Well, sometimes my more common issue is getting it off the tee. So
yeah, exactly.
Can't take that one for granted.
Right. So do you want to get into this?
I'm excited.
Yes.
Excited to jump into this. Yeah, I was thinking, when you think about starting a podcast, it's like, why would you start one when there's 1,000 other ones, a million other podcasts, and most of them don't last past 5 episodes. But the more I think about it, there's really a 3-way value add with doing a podcast, which is why I think it's an intriguing thing to do. The first is, it's really helpful for those that are listening to learn from the guests, and we'll talk about, a little bit more about what we want to draw out of those guests. But so it's a value add for the listeners, of course, learning and hearing the stories. It's also a value add for those guests because they can grow their network, grow their following, and ultimately help others through their stories and being transparent. And then thirdly, of course, it's a value add for us because we have selfishly, we have a great reason to ask for these conversations with people. And we can, generally speaking, rather than asking somebody to pick their brain, which I hate that phrase, or we can ask somebody, rather than asking them out to lunch or a, virtual coffee or whatever horrible buzz phrase you want to use, we can just have them on a podcast where they can share their story, get some value out of it, and we get to have a great conversation with them. So I think that's really the biggest reason why this sort of medium right now is it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we talked about is why this is going to be different. Like you get so much information about the normal way to transition out of the Army. And some people take advantage of it and they go work for Amazon or Tesla or like big companies that they just kind of transfer into that. But our goal is to show people that there's a lot of things out there that with just a little bit of research and a little bit of hard work, maybe before you even transition, you can really take advantage of those unique opportunities. Maybe entrepreneurship, maybe not. I mean, there's many options that we're going to talk about, and there's a lot of unique leaders that we're going to have on that have done a lot of different things. But I think the outside the box thinking is what we're really going to try to hit on for people to enable their transition.
I know for me, when I was getting out of the military, I, you just don't know what you don't know. And there's so many options out there, which is overwhelming, but it also is like, there's a world of possibility that you don't even know about. And there's so many different routes that could be the right one for you that you just haven't heard about or haven't met someone that's been on that route. So hopefully this can provide a large array of folks that have taken some alternate routes, maybe those that have taken more common routes, but have just done it in a really uh, elaborate way or done it in a really unique way. And we can highlight some of those stories. So it just opens up the world of possibilities. But given that, it can be overwhelming seeing a million different paths laid before you. And so part of this also will be to help narrow down, what are some criteria you can use to choose which route might be most suited for your personality. And again, one thing I talk to a lot of guys, and one of the biggest myths is whatever you choose is what you're stuck in for the next decade. And that's just not true. I mean, in the military, of course, you sign a contract, but for the vast majority of civilian jobs outside of the military, you're not signing your life away for the next 10 years. It's the next best decision. And then oftentimes, I talk to a lot of folks who they make a decision and they learn what they don't want to do. And that's in many cases just as valuable as what you do want to do, because then it redirects your course. So I think that's another purpose here is, amongst all the choices, how do we narrow those down and then make a better informed decision on what direction to go?
Yeah, and there are so many options. And not only that, but there's so many unique individuals transferring out of the military. So this podcast really isn't designed for one type of person. We both transitioned mid-career as officers, but really what we're trying to do is communicate with anybody who's transitioning out, whether that be after 20 years of service or 3 years of service, whether you're enlisted, NCO, officer, warrant officer, it doesn't really matter. We want to provide options to people who maybe have had phenomenal experiences in the Army or Marines or Navy, Air Force, whatever, but now the transition is upon them and they maybe had good experiences, bad experiences, but they're going to be able to use that experience to kind of apply to what we can teach them, and they should be able to take this and run with it.
Absolutely. So the way I see this, there's many high achieving transitioning service members who are eager to start their next chapter in the civilian world, but they find it difficult or overwhelming to know which direction to go. As we mentioned, there's endless possibilities. So some military skills are hard to translate, and with the countless paths, it can be a daunting thing to look at. So this podcast, the Veteran Ventures podcast, serves to provide insights on how to approach the transition process and useful roadmaps from successful individuals who are making waves in their next ventures or who have successfully navigated the transitioning process. So that's kind of what I see as the nutshell of this podcast, spelling out those roadmaps of those that have gone before you and are doing great things in the civilian world.
Yeah, and I don't think every single guest on the podcast will be former military. There's a lot of people that we might reach out to that are offering things to former military that might be the right call for, or might open up something for somebody. Just because they don't have military service doesn't mean that they don't represent an opportunity that somebody who has military service can pursue that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of folks that are doing great things for transitioning service members. The other day, I was just looking at all the organizations that help transitioning service members, and like we mentioned, there may not be one that does everything the right way or suits everyone, but there's so many folks that are there willing to help and providing great resources and free training, free guidance. That it's good to highlight some that maybe don't have a military background but are still very open and eager to help people. I also wanted to, highlight, I think in one phrase, I would say the goal of this podcast is to help transitioning service members find their next mission without wasting the countless hours applying to public job postings just to land at a job that they hate. Because I talk to a lot of guys, and that unfortunately happens fairly regularly, where they apply to 1,000 jobs on LinkedIn or Indeed or wherever it might be. They maybe even go through a corporate recruiter, and they land at a job that they may stay out for a year or two, but kind of hate it in the process. And they're kind of back to square one after, 18 to 24 months of this post-military job. So hopefully this can provide some guidance before going down that road.
Also, what this podcast is designed to be, and in your experience and my experience is similar over the last couple of years of transitioning out, is that, the SFL TAP process and the Army process or the military process that was given to us didn't really suffice or enable us to find what we wanted to pursue for our careers leaving the military. And I think what we're going to try to do is offer more exposure to people who are thinking about transitioning to help them understand, hey, this is how some people did it, literally step-by-step interviews with people and on how their experience occurred and what they did to successfully transition, but then also what's available to them. So I think explaining to our listeners what it actually is going to be as far as, hey, here's how the transition is going to work. You can actually start now. That's also something that we want people to understand. Is a big part of this podcast is we want people to understand that even while you're active duty, you can start sowing the seeds for your future employment or your future pursuits. And I think if we accomplish those things, I think we'll be pretty happy.
Another thing, Jack, is one question that I want to ask every guest and that we plan on teasing out of them is, and I not original for this. This actually came from Tim Ferriss's original in-person meetup that he did way back in the day. But one ask and one give, to where every guest has, everyone could receive value in some way, and everyone can give value in some way as well. But it's not always when you reach out to ask somebody to pick their brain. Everyone tells you like lead with value. If you're asking somebody to get lunch or something, you're just like taking their time, and probably it's hard to know. I mean, unless you really stalk somebody and try and figure out what they need, it can be really hard to figure out what that value is. So one of the questions that we plan on asking every guest is, what's one ask you have and what's one give? And one ask being, what's one thing that audience or anyone listening to this podcast could do to provide you value? And I think that's if someone was listening to this podcast, they hear a guest who is doing what they'd like to be doing or doing something that they're interested in doing, a really great way to learn more about what they're doing or to start building a relationship there is provide value to them. And so if each podcast guest gives an ask, like what's one thing they really could use? If it's like, followers on LinkedIn, then go follow them. If it's someone to do a property tour in San Antonio, Texas, for whatever reason, like go do that thing for them and maybe do it for free, like provide real value, because and give them the platform to ask that here. And then one give, a lot of these folks will have amazing platforms of their own. They'll have really amazing stories. And so we'll ask one way that they can, whether it's a piece of advice, it's like an open office hour thing, a phone call or a message, whatever they're willing to offer our guests, that they can freely put that out there and try and help the folks that are listening. So that's one of the questions that we plan on asking, I think will be really helpful for those that are part of the audience.
Yeah. And I think that's phenomenal. I think something I picked up on, I don't know how long ago I picked up on this, but it's, if you're looking for mentorship, oftentimes most people are willing to provide mentorship, but they're never going to reach out to you and say, hey, let me mentor you. Right. It's mostly on the subordinate or the mentee, I suppose, to ask for that mentorship. And I think what you're talking there is a phenomenal way to at least open the door for people. And if you're seeking out somebody for mentorship and they say, hey, this is something that would be value for me, now you have that hey, let me contact them and actually provide that value that they literally spoke about that they need. And now that's an opening for you to ask for mentorship from somebody who's probably willing to do it. If they're willing to meet with us on our podcast, they're probably willing to also provide mentorship to people who are willing to put the work in when they receive that mentorship. And that's the other thing, is we want people to understand, like when you receive the mentorship, when you take this podcast, the best case scenario for us is you take this information and you act upon it, and you reach out to us and you tell us, hey, this podcast led me to do this and this and this. And then that's going to be the best, like the most reward for us, is seeing that we're having an impact on people's decisions and what their actions are during their transition.
You just hit on an amazing point right there. I think another big thing that's missed by people that are asking to be a mentee or asking for someone to help them is the follow-up, man. Like they reach out, they take an hour of that person's time or however long, they get some great advice, and they may or may not take it. Hopefully they do, but then they never even follow up with that person because that I'm telling you right now, that person wants to know that their time was well spent and that they
Right.
actually had an impact on that person's life. And it's something as simple as an email, a LinkedIn message, a Twitter DM, whatever it is, just to let them know that you took that advice and you had X impact as a result of it. And I think that goes a really long way. And by the way, if you're looking for a mentor, it's that consistent follow up that builds the relationship, shows that you take action, and actually follow what they say and value their perspective. That goes a really long way. So I see very few people that do that. And so I'll step off my
Right.
soapbox now, but just
Yeah,
following up after after you get that conversation is so critical.
exactly. Because that's the benefit that the mentor gets. Oftentimes they're doing it for free. They're doing it out of kindness and just wanting to help. But the benefit that they get oftentimes is just the fact that they had an impact on you. And if you can confirm with them through like solid communication afterwards, it means a lot. And then they'll probably follow through with you and provide even more. And that's how you create those strong, lasting mentor relationships that we hopefully will help enable through this podcast.
Well, for all those potential guests listening to this episode, you've now heard that we're going to have one ask. So you could come on here and just ask for a Tesla and get 100 Teslas from all the listeners. So hopefully that incentivizes some amazing people to come on here and ask for something.
Yeah, for sure. But I think we are going to have, some heavy hitters on here. I think we've developed some relationships over the years that I think people that we respect immensely. And I think the goal is to have people who are going to be impactful on this podcast. It's not just, our buddy from down the street. Although I do want to have my buddy from down the street on here at some point. It's these people that we're going to have on the podcast are, respected business leaders. They're leaders in their industry. Now, it's not all business, but it's definitely people who are at the top of their game. And, I think what we're going to provide is we're going to try to draw out their, best tidbits for how to transition, and then also what to focus on moving forward. But that's the goal of the podcast.
Right. Well, every person that we have on here is going to be someone that you and I genuinely want to learn from and want to talk to. So it's like you guys can just pull up a seat beside us as we talk to these amazing people and learn alongside of us because we're just scratching our own itch with this at the end of the day. And so
Yeah,
hopefully it scratches a little itch for others. Yeah. So just for anyone listening to this, if you have someone you would love to learn from, then maybe we could get on this podcast. Feel free to send us any name. Any name goes. We'll do everything we can to get them on here. Ask and send us questions you'd like to ask them. The more feedback we can get, the more we can ask those directed questions and get those people on here, and we will do whatever we can to snag them.
absolutely. So I guess, do you want to do like a little prelude for the next couple episodes? I think episode 2 and 3 are just going to be getting to know us and who we are and how we're going to provide value to the podcast. And then podcast 4 and on is going to be guests of the podcast and trying to provide value that way.
Right. Yeah. I think we want to start off by just Jack and I have both taken slightly unconventional approaches to transitioning out of the military and feel like we have learned a lot of lessons the hard way and learned some others that could be of use to those listening. So hopefully we can be a resource in that regard, and then we can transition into others who are probably even better resources and could provide a lot of insight as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we are both newly transitioned military personnel. So I think, we're in it. I think we're fresh enough to provide value. But we also are kind of through the process already. So the lessons learned is definitely something that is going to be the focus for my side. Of course, I want, I want people to get to know us, but we also have unique situations that I think we can provide some value as far as how we transitioned and how we set ourselves up for success.
Well, I
So
think that could be a wrap on the first one. We could keep
just
going
doing this.
for a long time, but I think
Yeah, but I think concise for the first one makes sense. I
yeah.
mean, you know, the goal is to get into this and have plenty of podcasts. Do you go to the first podcast very often when you find one, or do you? Yeah, I'm not sure I scroll to the beginning and even listen.
And yeah, at the very beginning, like if I find a podcast that is one of my buddies or one that I find that I like and it's or someone I've been following and they start one, I will go to the beginning and like listen to their overview or whatever.
Yeah.
But moreover, I think as we're on other episodes, we could be like, yeah, we referenced in the very first one what what this whole thing is about. And so people could go back and hear that way. So it's
Yeah.
kind of just like the have is in case we want to direct people that direction.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's a necessity. The hope is that we've got, 100 podcasts and maybe it'll get buried.
Yeah.
I do think that recording is easier than editing.
Oh, for sure. I
Like
agree.
it's easy to sit down here and just talk to you for 45 minutes.